What is up, Flutter devs? Today we're going to continue to extract pieces of our core implementation of Flutter processing into their own files so that the structure is simpler, so that developers like you can contribute to this project in the future. Let's go jump into it and see what we're extracting today. In our last video, we created this concept of a sketch painting context, which captured things like the size of what we're painting, the recorder in the canvas that accept drawing commands. We have the intermediate image, which is bitmap data that is rasterized during a frame as we paint various pixels. We can access those pixels as byte data via the pixels property. And eventually, at the end of a frame, we publish an image. We created the sketch painting context because pretty much everything that we do in a sketch requires these tools. We brought that concept into our core implementation, where instead of directly accessing a canvas, we go through this painting context. That has hopefully put us in a position to yank out other details from this one singular core implementation, but we do still need to make a change here, I think. What I would like to do in this video is I'd like to grab all of these methods under the 2D primitives like point and line and circle and ellipse. I'd like to move them to their own file and to their own mixin, essentially. But the problem is, if we put them in their own mixin, how do we access the painting context? We can't inject it in the constructor because mixins don't have constructors. The only option that I can think of is to actually define a mixin that only applies to some kind of sketch base class, and then that sketch base class exposes a painting context. So let's see how we might accomplish that. Here in core, I think we can go, for now we'll declare it in the same file, but let's go above, looking for the beginning of the sketch definition. Here's our sketch definition. I am going to define an abstract class called, what should it be called? I guess we can call it base sketch for now, for lack of a better term. And then base sketch is going to expose a painting context or a sketch painting context. And we will have a sketch painting context, which is painting context. And then we run into the question of when and how this should be instantiated. In this sketch class that we already have, we have a painting context. I declared it in here somewhere. Here we go. In theory, if we move this sketch painting context into the base class, then we can create mixins that can only be applied to the base class, and then they can get access to painting context. So let's see how we might accomplish that. It looks like we can just instantiate a new one immediately because that's what we're doing in the sketch class itself. But now the sketch class, we already have a bunch of mixins here, but we want to extend the base sketch. And I can't remember the order of these terms. I guess that works out. Okay, so extends goes before the mixins. Now sketch extends base sketch. So this stuff is part of our sketch class or sketch objects, which means we don't need the one that's already in the sketch class. We've essentially moved this to a superclass. We'll come to this painting context right here and we will get rid of it. And I guess that I was expecting that actually to break everything, but it doesn't, because even the underscore property is visible within the sketch class. Typically, we think of this as being private, but it's important to remember that in Dart, private is really on a per file basis. It's not on a per class basis. But one thing that I do want to say is I want to say @protected on this public accessor. Here's the unfortunate consequence of what we're doing here. Anybody that implements Sketch, not developers like you and me who maybe actually implement Sketch capabilities, like not people working on the package, but just somebody who's using this Flutter processing package and they're issuing draw commands and things like that, they technically now have access to the painting context. Ideally, this would be purely an implementation detail. This would not be part of the public interface. But it is now, because I couldn't think of any way to facilitate mixins without making this public. It's unfortunate. I'm not happy about it, but it is what it is. The one thing we can do, though, at least from if anybody uses a simple sketch, we can dissuade them from accessing the painting context by marking it protected. Only subclasses, you'll get a lint warning if anything other than a subclass accesses painting context. Now, if someone chooses to extend sketch, which will be very common as well, unfortunately, they're going to get access to the painting context and there's nothing we can do about it. So if any of you have a better solution to this, I mean, watch the rest of the video to see what we do with this. But if you have a better way of hiding the painting context, you can let me know. I couldn't come up with any better answer. But the reason that I created this base sketch is so that we can now create a mixin. Under source, I'm going to create a new directory for shape or shapes. Let's see, let's go to the documentation. Here, by the way, if this looks strange to you, it's because all of a sudden processing.org redid the website. So I opened this up one day and it's a whole new UI. So this category is called shape that we're dealing with. It's shape singular and then 2D primitives. So I'm going to rename this to just shape singular. And then I am going to create a file called 2D primitives. In this file, we're going to create a mixin called 2D primitives, and we're going to use the keyword on. This can only be applied to a base sketch. It can only be mixed into a base sketch, which means that we have guaranteed access to the painting context. We can access that from our mixin because we know for a fact that we are being applied to a base sketch. Let's start moving methods in here. Shape 2D primitives. We want to take all of these methods. Arc, square, rect, triangle, quad. Cut all of those out. Come back over here, paste. First, let's import the things that we need to import. Now you'll see all the underscore painting context aren't resolving, and that's because it's not called underscore painting context, it's just called painting context. So first, let me just get all these imports. Maybe that's all of them. Okay, now I'm going to say replace underscore painting context with painting context. Replace all. And just like that, compile warnings are gone. We're accessing the painting context. Why? Because we are a mixin on top of base sketch. And what does base sketch give us? It gives us access to a painting context. And our sketch class extends base sketch, which means that we can now mix in 2D primitives. And there we go. Now it's mixed in. And now, in theory, everything should still compile. Anything that was using those calls beforehand, like any of our tests, should still pass, which is what we should do now. We should say Flutter test, and we should see if all of those tests still pass. Whenever they're ready. All right, sweet. All 54 tests pass. Great. I'm also going to make a name change here. So first of all, I'm going to start with sketch because I already have this pattern going where all of our sketch mixins start with sketch. I'm also going to start with the category, which is shape. So these are shape 2D primitives. And I'm going to see if that pattern works with all the other mixins that we use. Now, it was pointed out to me when I created these mixins, I didn't actually declare them as mixins. I declared them as classes. And that's because at the time I forgot the mixin keyword and the compiler was complaining. And so I just went with classes. But let's go ahead and switch all of these to mixins as well. So see, instead of class, we're going to say mixin. Now, in here, I'm not going to say on base sketch, because frankly, I don't care where you choose to use this mixin. It's only intended for base sketch, but if you want these constants somewhere else, then you go ahead and mix it in. Doesn't matter to me. So for all of these first 6, they're going to be mixins, but they're not going to require base sketch. And my computer is doing all sorts of God knows what right now. Okay, mixin. Mixin. All right. So we want to repeat this pattern a number of times. I think maybe we'll do one group per video or something, but there is one more thing that I want to try to pull out. We have random stuff in here, and this also should not need to be defined on base sketch. This can probably be its own mixin without any other requirements, but we do have some variables that actually can change over time in here. So let's see if we can extract random without any problem. First, let's figure out what group this is in. Okay, so here's random, and then random is under what? Math. So math, and then random. I think we already have math, okay, because we already did calculations and trigonometry. So now we're going to say random. And now that I see the underscores here, I'm going to come back up to shape, and I'm going to use an underscore here. Now, I don't actually think these underscores, they may or may not make a difference in terms of exporting. But one of the ways that I use underscores before a file name is these indicate to me files that should not generally be available outside of either this package or this area of the file system. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll create a directory or a package. I'll have a bunch of files with underscores, and then I'll have one file without an underscore, which exports the others. And this is a way of kind of saying these files, like we want different files because it's easier to work across those files, but these are all part of the same problem and solution. Therefore, you should import all of them together. And so even when underscores aren't technically relevant, I'll still use them for my own organization purposes. However, in a package, given that we're under the source directory and these have underscores, I don't think you can even access these files from outside the package. I don't think. You can try it and find out, but I think that's what happens. Okay. Now getting back to it, we'll come in here, we'll grab all this random stuff. Random, and then Perlin noise, random Gaussian. Okay. Save that. And you'll notice our tests are red now because we took out public APIs that they depend on, which is expected. And we'll call this sketch math random. We'll import these things. Okay. All the compilation issues here are gone. We'll save that. We'll come back to core. Up here is sketch. And we will add, let's see, I guess we can put that sketch math random right there. I'm seeing also these two things should have math category in the name. Math calculations. Math trigonometry. Of course, you don't need these naming conventions. If you remember where everything sits, then that's fine. But by adding these to the names, because we're accumulating so many files and groups of behavior, the ability to see what group it comes from might be useful. And then constants is its own category, I guess. So is color, data conversion. So this should be sketch, data conversion. And then input, we have time and date. So this should be sketch, input, time and date. And then I think that's everything. Now, let's see what it's desired for. Okay, eventually I have to get this frame time working again. Let's see, we're also seeing some yellow up here at the top, probably some imports that we don't need. So we got rid of these imports. I'll do, what is it? Control Option O to organize inputs or organize imports. Save that. And now once again, let's make sure we didn't break our tests. Let's run them all. All right, our tests are good. Now, I did notice as we were scrolling one thing that might still be relevant. Down here at the bottom, we have some data structures defined, like ellipse and arc mode. There's a question as to whether those make sense being moved into the shape file. Let's see where, well, we can check where the constructor is used, but that's going to find a bunch of tests. The question is, does ellipse mean anything outside of 2D primitives? Let's see if we can get away with moving it there. Come back to core. It's not just ellipse, it's also square. So let's take square, ellipse, and arc mode. Bring them into 2D primitives. See all this red stuff on the right here? That's because this file actually does make heavy use of these data structures and this enum. Now all the compilations over here are gone. However, we just created a bunch of compilation issues in our tests. Constants is a weird place for that to break, but I guess in constants we were doing some pixel painting using ellipses. And then definitely down here under shape, we have a whole bunch of red because we no longer have access to this class because it's in a different file. But here's what we do about that. Let's see. We can export the file. Unfortunately, that's going to export the mixin as well. So 2D primitives is this file that now has the definition of ellipse and square, but we're not exporting any of the stuff in this file. So here, Flutter Processing, where we export this stuff, we're not exporting, and this probably shouldn't be exported either. So we could say export source shape 2D primitives, and notice that all of our tests are now good to go. However, we just exported that mixin. We just exported our sketch 2D primitives mixin, which really doesn't have any meaning outside of the package. So either I think those data structures should go back into core, or what we could do, let's see, we could create under shape we could say something like shapes, and then come down here and grab these data structures and the enum and put them in here. Of course, we need to import some things. And then in our 2D primitives file, we will just import the shapes file. And then in Flutter Processing, we will export shapes. Which of those approaches is preferable? I don't know. We'll go with this for now. This solves the problem. Generally speaking, I would like to avoid some. It's possible that this core file definition isn't quite accurate anymore in terms of calling it core. The thing is, I don't really want the place where the processing widget and the place where the sketch implementation is defined, which I can never find in here. It's fine for sketch to reference all of these mixins, but it's weird for these mixins to depend on sketch. Base sketch is fine. The weird thing, I guess, is that we have both of these in the same file, and that's why the dependency seems kind of strange. We'll see if that changes over time, but it makes sense for sketch to know about the mixins. It's kind of weird for the mixins to know about sketch. That's what I'm thinking. We'll see if that matters in the future. This is one group, our 2D primitives, one group of things extracted out of our core definition and moved into its own file. We also moved math random. Those are two mixins we've taken out. In the next video, we'll see what else we can extract, and we'll keep going until we've logically decomposed this as much as possible. So I'll see you in the next video.